They may not, so it's a work in progress. I'm figuring it out as we go. All right, tonight we're getting into the text of Ecclesiastes proper. If you remember, if you were here last week, we did an intro class on the book of Ecclesiastes. Does anybody, if you were here last week, do you remember what we talked about as kind of the main point of Ecclesiastes? What's Ecclesiastes all about? Anybody recall? All is vanity, right? We'll see that here very quickly in verse 1. That's a good, that's, I think, the writer's, I think that's his summary of his conclusion. Everything is vanity, all is vanity. We're going to talk about that question in a second. Anything else? We talked about maybe why it was written, or its slant. We talked about it's kind of a, if you remember I quoted someone who used the word eristic or apologetic. It's a book of an argument, right? What's the argument of Ecclesiastes? Do you remember? Everything is meaningless. What did you say, Ricky?
Life's stuff. What's the point?
Yeah, what's the point? It's an argument against a secular life. That's what the book is, why I believe it's written. I believe Ecclesiastes is written as an argument for anyone who has a secular worldview, which means a worldview that's only kind of constrained by everything under the sun. And it's written to say that that's not enough. That doesn't have enough adequate answers. It doesn't have adequate wisdom or life for us. And so Ecclesiastes is written to criticize anybody who would have a secular worldview and even, I think, a secular religion. Some people follow the teachings of Jesus just because he offers good morals. And if that's the only reason you follow Jesus, Ecclesiastes would say, and I'll join in telling you, that's not enough. It's not enough just to be a good person. And it's not enough just to learn good things from Jesus Christ or from God. That's not enough. And this book will criticize those types of worldviews. So I sent out some questions yesterday, and those are what I printed out that Mike has in the back. And that's all that's going to be on the PowerPoint tonight. I would encourage you, we'll be in the ESV. These are ESV Bibles. You don't have to be in the ESV. There are plenty of good translations. I actually prefer the New American Standard personally. ESV is a great translation, though. But just so you know, these questions will be written with the ESV in mind and some of the word choices of the ESV. But yeah, we're just going to pick up reading here in Ecclesiastes, and I think it'd be good. Well, first of all, let's start with this question. Not really a question, right? What I want to start each section with, I've tried to find sections that are pretty confined and enough to look at for each class. If anybody got to it, did anybody get to this question in the past 24 hours and write a little summary of this section? It's okay if you didn't. This is what we're going to try and build into this as we get into this every week. It's really helpful to write these summaries and kind of wrap our brains around the big picture of what's going on. Did anybody have a summary? Mike, and then Kathy.
Learn from my mistakes. You don't have to do it the hard way. Basically what I get out of it.
Yeah, that's certainly, he's writing right. He's writing about experiences and we don't have to learn from our own mistakes. We can learn from his mistakes to some extent. I like that insight about this. Kathy?
I wrote vanity, nothing new, that which has been, will be. And then wisdom, intellectualism, that excludes God.
Mm-hmm.
And then pleasure is self-gratification with the desire of the heart.
Yeah.
Those are the three things that I think you find in those sentences.
Yeah. What's the first one again?
Vanity.
Yeah, vanity, and then wisdom and pleasure. Yeah. Those are. I think that's a good insight into this. That's a good kind of summation of what's been talked about in here. Anybody else get to summing up this up? Jan?
I wrote, a life without God is meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing we can do in all creation that will be worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
There is no permanence.
Yeah, that's really well put. I love that. Good. Yeah, that's so great. This is a good place for us to start. Like that's where we're going. Like those things covered a lot of what we're going to cover in this section, this first section of Ecclesiastes. Can I get a volunteer to read Ecclesiastes 1:1 through 11, the first 11 verses of the book?
All right.
Go ahead, Jesse.
The words of the preacher, the son of David, Keehn in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind. And on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness, and man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. All right, the first question from the section, what do the phrases vanity of vanity and all is vanity mean? There's two kind of in the introductory verses, in verses 1, really verse 2. It says, vanity of vanity, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. These are kind of two different phrases, kind of making one point together, but what do these two phrases mean separately? What do they mean together? What do you think? What is vanity of vanity? When the Bible uses phrases like this, like it'll say Lord of Lords, King of Kings, what's the meaning of putting something of the same word of something, right? Emphasis? Yeah, so when it says like King of Kings, it means he's the king above all kings, right? And when he says Lord of Lords, same thing. Vanity of vanities is similar. It's the vainest vain thing you could possibly imagine. It's just this kind of, in some senses, hyperbole, right? Where it's just the most extreme thing. You can say vanity of vanities, and this is leading up to what? What's the next phrase? All is vanity, right? What does that mean? We've already talked about this, but just wrap our heads around. This is the main point. What does that mean that all is vanity? Pointless. Remember that?
All this like rust and moth, right? Like moth
Yeah.
is destroyed.
Yeah.
The thing, it's not, we put all the stock in what's here, and poof, it's gone, and there's only a microsecond of our existence anyways.
Yeah, that's well put, and especially the poof, and it's gone. I like that because what the word havel is smoke, right? This word vanity is actually the word for smoke or vapor, and that's the language in a sense. I mean, I don't know if he would have said poof, but he does say something to that effect where it's like, then it vanished in a puff of cloud, like it's gone. Everything is smoke, and a lot, he'll say grasping after wind and all that in this book. These are the ideas, and so if you heard some of the summaries, Jan, you did a good job summarizing this aspect of it, that it's a pretty bleak book, right? The view of the preacher, Koheleth is the Hebrew word for it. Some people call him the critic. However you look at him, his outlook is pretty bleak, but what we're going to see throughout this book is that he doesn't actually have a bleak outlook, but rather he is presenting the bleakness of a certain outlook in this world to challenge us to think through our own viewpoints and our own understanding of what is wise, how to live, what is the purpose of everything, what's the meaning of everything. And until we appreciate that everything under the sun is vanity, then we're not going to appreciate his arguments at all. So you already see the conclusion for the person who has a secular worldview or a worldview without God. The preacher's going to tell you it's not going to be worthwhile. It's going to be empty, no matter what conclusion you come to. Anything else about this?
Well, just one last thought is that the vanity of vanities, in addition to your thought on it being kind of like the king of all vanities or whatever, it's just, you think about, there's vanities, meaning there's just a lot of different vanities that exist, right? Like our love of food or our love of like movies, whatever it might be, right? Like there's all these different vanities we can strive after on this earth. When we say vanity of vanities, it's just lumping all those different things that we could have vanities over into one category called vanity. So it's just vanity of vanities.
Yeah, it's like the overarching view of how all of it is, not just specifics. But yeah, it's like a tapestry of vain things that make the whole thing into one great vanity. Good. So he poses a question then in verse 3. Look in your Bibles. What's the question he poses in verse 3, and how would you answer it? What question does he pose in chapter 1, verse 3? Yeah. What's the point, you might say? Dad, you said what advantage, right? In the ESV, it says, what does a man gain by all his toil at which he toils under the sun? What's the benefit? What's the point? How would you answer that question? Before, maybe you know the answer of Ecclesiastes, that's fine, you can give that answer. But seriously, if I just asked you that, try and get yourself into your own headspace, how would you answer? What's the point of all your work? What are you working for? What might you say? What would you say?
Your family.
Your family, right? That's a good answer, right? You're working for your family.
Happy life.
A happy life. Good. What else? What else might you say? Kathy?
I said survival.
Survival. Yeah, that's well put. That's very honest, right? It's honest. Dave?
The man won't eat or won't work,
Yeah. Similar to Eliza's answer, right? For family, right? For myself and for family. That I want to eat, I want to put food on the table, and so I'm going to keep working to make sure the income comes in. Dad?
I know we were made in God's image, and every day when He created, He saw and He looked at it was very good. And so there's a sense of fulfillment in what we do,
Yes.
but we shouldn't extend that to mean that is the meaning of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's the immediate enjoyment.
Yeah. No, that is a great answer, especially for someone who fears God, right? For an answer for those who follow God, that God worked when He made the earth, and He put us in the garden to do what? To work and to enjoy the work. And so there is a sense, and we're going to see this very quickly in these first few chapters, the preacher's going to make that point, actually. As he views the value of work, he's going to say, well, there's really not much but to enjoy it. Even though, like you do, it is for putting food on the table, and it is for survival, and all these ways we think of it, that's all well put. But this is interesting. You ever think about this question? You ever, on your way into work, think, what am I doing this for again? You got a bad case of the Mondays, maybe. You're like, okay, just one more week. Let's do this, rewind it, and play it back again. Sometimes you get caught up. And what the next section, the poem that starts really kind of, we're already into it a little bit, but really in verses 4 through 11, we're going to see this poem. That's the point it's making, right? I'm kind of answering my own question a little bit, as we'll see. But that's what we're kind of see. The world is kind of like this. Every day you go back to work, right? In the Jewish system, it seems like they had 6 days of work and 1 day off. We have a 2-day weekend, Some people have no weekends. If you're just working every single day, you get up, sun rises, got to get to work. That can make you really think about your life, right? And these answers, you have to ask, are they good answers? And are they, really the question of Ecclesiastes is that an adequate answer? Is working to survive going to sustain you? Kim?
I think it makes you think about laying up treasures in heaven, because if we're going to be here and we got to work, yes, we have to eat and have support, but in our other time, are we laying up treasures in heaven? Are we just having simple pleasures or moments of happiness? And just kind of makes you think of the long-term game about, am I spending my time laying up treasures and doing His work, or am I just building? It's like the whole thing where, you travel the world and you collect all your seashells, and then you die and everybody just dumps those in the Goodwill box. And
Yeah.
it's like, for what? So that you could show off, I guess, what you got to do. And, But, did that lay up treasures in heaven? And so it's such a perspective book in that way.
Yes.
It's about what you do with your time. It's so fleeting.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great, you're all seeing, it's interesting to read this book this book isn't argued and slanted towards people, I would say, by and large, like us, right, who don't have a secular worldview, who have the view that you shared, Dad, that we know that there is a God above the heavens, above the sun in a sense. We're all living under the sun. He's above the sun. And we all know that we need to store up treasures for heaven, and where moth and rust don't destroy, like you pointed out too, Jesse. And Ecclesiastes is going to, for those of us who are already believers in God, it's going to really emphasize and underline and bold and italicize that point for us. Make sure there's something more than your work. Because even the conclusion, you should enjoy it, is going to be his conclusion. That's a spoiler alert for the answer to his question. That's how he answers it. But the question still comes, is it enough is that what your life is about, just enjoying the work you do? Because that should leave there, that shouldn't scratch the itch completely if you're really honest with yourself. Daryl, you had your hand up too.
Yeah, Kim kind of touched on it, but I think as you get older, you gain this perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Right? As you go through life and you start to realize, and if you are a godly person, you really start to appreciate as you get older, whether your family grows, you have grandchildren, whatever, you start to understand really the significance of what God, the value of God.
Yeah.
So I think you gain that.
Amen. Yeah. There is kind of a privilege of youth and I put that in quotation, air quotes, a privilege of the youth, to think that, I don't need to answer that question. Or what's the point, when you haven't we're not putting food on the table for more and more people, or you haven't gone through the mundane aspect of doing the same job over and over again. You don't have to ask that question maybe. But as you get older, I believe it, that the more and more you start to feel like, I really need to answer this question. I really hope there's something more to this. So this is it. Most of the projects I've done, some of them are mediocre, some of them are fine, some of them maybe occasionally they're great, but even those, sometimes they're not appreciated when they're great. So all these things are going to be questions and angles the preacher is going to poke and ask us, have you really thought about this? And so these are on the right path. So let's ask this question. What is the main point of the poem in verses 2 through 11? Do you see this? Jesse read it for us a second ago. The sun rises and it goes down, the wind blows and goes around and around, the streams run to the sea, but the sea isn't full. What's the point of this poem? What? He says it at some points. He kind of shows you he says the point he's making at different places, but what do you think?
They're all loops.
Yeah.
All cycles and loops that you can't get out of, you can't break. You could say that they're doom loops in a way.
Yeah.
In their outlet, but
yeah, they're all loops. They're all cycles that have no end, right? Ricky?
And to keep in mind, everyone is put together, if you look at it through secular eyes, and if you don't look at it through what God has done for you, you go through this life and you want to kill yourself every Monday morning because you go to work. But when you fear God and keep His commandments and you search for those treasures, you got the treasures at home, you got the treasures, when you talk to people about Christ, that's the treasure.
Yeah.
But if you go through it and just, oh man,
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, that's well put. Oh, go ahead, Nikki.
It kind of seems to me that we're not, that they're saying that we're taking it for granted. We're not appreciating how intricate and beautiful that God has made it all.
Yeah, there is. I think you're right that implicit and inherent in this poem is an observation that this is how the world works, and there is a beauty in this. What he's going to say in Ecclesiastes 3, God's made everything beautiful in its time, looking at the seasons of life similarly to this. It's a similar poem in the start of chapter 3. I think you're right that there is an inherent observation at kind of the clockwork nature of everything, right? Sometimes people make arguments about God as the great clockmaker, he put every gear together and perfectly, so it all just turns and works together. I think you're right. Is that kind of what you're saying? That there's just a beauty in how it all fits together?
Yeah, but also how we go on with our lives and we're just kind of blinded to the fact that
Yeah.
it's amazing.
Yeah, we take it for granted.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I'm glad you pointed that out. Do you have a thought? No? Okay. Anyway, I'll move on. All right. Go ahead, Kim.
Let's talk about verse 8, because I feel like that's such an important verse, as in things don't change, because it's we never are content. I mean, look at all of the rise and falls of nations and leaders, and it's just no one's content. It's more power, more money, more, and that never changed. It started that way, and it's still that way, and I like that verse, because it's true. As humans, we're never satisfied. And
Yeah.
continues on.
Yeah, at the center of this poem about all these things, keep turning. There's these cycles that never end. Like you pointed out in verse 8, the preacher makes this observation. What does he say in chapter 1, verse 8? All things are what? Full of weariness is what the ESV says. Everything is, it's tiring. A man can't even speak to how tiring it is. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. And the point even is it's funny because maybe this even gets to your point a little bit, Nikki. You see these things every single day, and even if you do appreciate them, you still want more. In a sense, the opposite point of view, in a sense, where it's they're both true. Either we just get callous to it, or there's just never enough. The sea gets all the water in the world, and it's never full. I can gather all the seashells in the world, and I still want to gather more. I can have all the money in the world, like Scrooge McDuck, and dive into my pile of gold coins, and I'll still want more. It doesn't matter. And there's something about this where it's it's an interesting conclusion he comes to, that everything's full of weariness. Do we agree with this? Is there any disagreement with this? I mean, do you like, if I told you everything's just full of weariness, would you be like, hey, maybe you slow your roll, Ben? Are you sure everything is full of, like, is there any counterpoints to this? Or what do you agree with his conclusion?
I don't think I agree with it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I mean, it's a take on the cycles that God's created and put here, but he put them there for a reason.
Yeah.
He put them there to stabilize the atmosphere of the earth and to balance temperatures and, the water cycle. Like, he put all this stuff here to be a cycle for a reason, for us to live on and survive on it.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, these things inanimmately don't get here.
Yeah.
The rain doesn't care that it flows.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it just seems like this is a pessimistic view.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I mean, that's why people will call him the critic, right? He's looking at these things that are true, and he is taking like a very negative view of it. Yeah, no, that's well put. And there is an optimistic side to it. You're right. Gene?
Well, I take it personally, and I say, yeah, I do agree with it. Every morning when my alarm goes off, it's weird.
Yeah. And so that's the funny thing about this observation, is that it is so true, and it also, I think, a lot of our interactions with it depend on, maybe this is like a great acid test for, are you a pessimist or an optimist, right? Maybe it's that. Or maybe it's about what season of life you're in right now. Or, there's so many things that change maybe our how willing or how quick we would agree or disagree with the preacher here, right? And I almost think he writes in a way that's very acidic. Like, it's very like, whoa, dude, like that's a lot. It's heavy, and it's sharp, and it's incisive, and that's all purposeful to make us think, do I even agree with this guy? Like, is this really how the world is? Because he's making these observations, but if we write them off too quickly, we'll also miss his point. These are things that are meant to be like, is this how the world works? Like, am I seeing this too? Go ahead, Keith.
If we keep that secular thinking, yeah, it's gonna be
Yeah.
saying that your last
Yeah.
say that every day. But when we're back to what Jesse said, those people, we folks that fear God, understand His ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, man, the other day, cool. I get to see the Lord Borealis, or I get to see Jesse, I get to see, I get to see everyone.
Yeah.
But if you just go through life like the world does,
Mm-hmm.
everything from politics, like Kim said, from politics to whatever, you're never satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And Solomon, the preacher, with all the different wives and everybody being a king, and you can see it, there's a point of everybody's coming at you.
Mm-hmm.
This is crazy, but I got to stay close to God.
Yeah.
That's the way he's thinking. If not, I'd have somebody.
Yeah, you can quickly, and this is where like secularism does start to, often can lead to what's called nihilism, right? There's a pointlessness to life. There's no point. And so that's where this thing is full of weariness. And I agree, like the eye is never satisfied with looking at Jesse. It's just never enough. You always want to look at him again. Cass, go ahead. You didn't see that one coming? Ricky kind of made that point. I was just building off what he said. Go ahead, Cass.
It's an encouragement.
I agree.
If he wasn't encouragement, I would just look at him like,
I got you.
Just do it.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. Go ahead, Cass.
I think we're missing the second point of verse 8, where it says, all things are full of weariness, a man cannot utter it.
Yeah.
I'm taking that interpretation to mean we can't even speak or write down all of the things
Yeah.
that make us weary and weigh us down. Because
Yeah.
I'm trying to, David Allen's Getting Things Done system, you write down everything you need to do.
Oof.
And you continually write down all of these things, and it's supposed to get it out of your head, but all it does is a
That sounds horrible.
yeah. It does. And you can't, like, a man cannot utter it. You
Yeah.
can't even, there's so many things dragging you down during the day,
Yeah.
you can't even keep track of them all.
Yes. That's why in the last question I asked is, are there any examples you could add to this? I mean, bills, I feel like, are a perfect example of this in my opinion. Just like the bills keep coming, and it's like no matter what you do, there's going to be another bill coming next week. That's just how it is. Taxes, whatever you want to put in here. Money, I don't know why money's on the mind, but all right. Yeah, this is good. I think this is a poem. Sometimes people look at this poem and say that he's making this apologetic point about how, it's important to see that he's making a philosophical point, not saying that God created all these things like this per se. Like there is observations about this, and we do take them for granted. I don't think he's making a scientific argument here. He's just making a point of observation that this is how the world turns and works, and it's wearisome. And we can't, like Cass's point, we can't even really put words to it. And our eyes will never be satisfied with seeing. Our ears will never be filled with hearing, no matter what we get or what we do, what we see, what we hear. And this poem really is defining the whole book. We haven't talked much about the nothing new under the sun aspect of this, but that's kind of the conclusion to this whole poem. That's the point he's been making. Everything is the same. And he's not saying there's never going to be technology or anything like that, but he's saying people are the same and interactions with each other and with everything are the same. Smartphones come out and now we're anxious and depressed again more than we ever have been. Well, that's just the same old people. We think we get this new system and it leads us back into ourselves and we go back internally. What happens? We get really anxious and depressed and we're like, we need something more than this. That's the cycle of humankind. Read the book of Judges to think a similar point. Good. So let's move on. Can someone read the rest of chapter 1, verses 12 through 18 for us? Ecclesiastes 1, 12 through 18. Go ahead, Ricky.
I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under the sun, or under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. And I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realize that this is also striving after wind, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain.
Just from bleak to bleaker, right? Thank you, Ricky. That's good. So what task has God given the sons of men? And how does the preacher feel about it? Do you see it here? There's a task he says we've been given, or business in the ESV. What task or business has God given the sons of men? Yeah, to explore everything that's done. It's so funny because this exact idea is in Proverbs. It says, somewhere in Proverbs, I forget where it is off the top of my head, but it says, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the glory of kings to search out a matter, right? Proverbs has this maybe the optimistic, pessimistic thing. Proverbs is kind of like the optimistic version of Ecclesiastes. You can live a good life. You can have all these good things. It's so glorious to search these things out. And the preacher comes in and says, what a painful task to search all these things out. Which is it? Which is true? They're both true, right? Again, we're going to get into it. How does the preacher feel about it? He's tired, right? I mean, in verse 13, what does he say? What does he call it? In verse 14, he calls it striving after the wind, right? Vanity. Verse 13, he says it's an unhappy business. What about the last verse? Verse 18, what does he say there? Grief, right? And ESV says, much wisdom is much vexation. He who increases in knowledge increases sorrow. You ever felt like that? Or you want to learn something, or you want to get to know someone, and the more you hear of their story, the more you're like, oh boy. And it's just heartache after heartache. And this world is full of that. It's not just a one person's story. That's this world. And the preacher, the critic, whatever you call him, Koheleth, as he said, called in the Hebrew, this is his, pessimistic, optimistic. In some senses, a lot of people call him the ultimate realist. He's just looking that this is the world. There is sorrow upon sorrow in this world. And if we haven't noticed it, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, have I put blinders on to the realities around me? That's part of the question Ecclesiastes asks us. I don't want us all to come away from all these classes just depressed, all right, morose and sad. But sometimes when you get into the book of Ecclesiastes, if you don't agree with him, or if you think that it's just not right, or he's too pessimistic or negatively aspected, and you have to ask yourself, have I really taken a hard look at life in this world? Maybe I'm privileged enough to not have a life like this, but taking a hard look at some people who just really have no chances. Who, an example I gave last week, Haley and I are so joyful right now and just enjoying the blessings of having a healthy 3-month-old girl, and she's just a delight in so many ways. And yet we have friends who just had a stillborn born at 37 weeks. Does that mean we shouldn't enjoy our daughter? Well, of course not. But one of the points that I think of this book is not just that everything is vanity, but one of the points he's making with that is life is absurd. That's just a roll of the dice. That could have been us. And we would be experiencing grief and sorrow and weeping right now instead of joy. And what's the difference? Nothing. We're people just like them. They're healthy. It's just chance, a lot of it. That point we made in this book. But as you seek out wisdom and the meaning of life and everything and working, he's going to explore a lot of these more specifically, but the general wisdom is that there is a lot of pain and it's just absurd. If you get to enjoy life, then you should enjoy it. That's one of his points. But we also have to really take on that there is a lot of vexation and sorrow and sadness in this world, and we shouldn't always dwell on it to the point of just being doom and gloom. But we have to, at some points, at least spend a little contained time understanding that this world isn't all optimistic all the time. And maybe some of us do that too much. And to that, I would say maybe we need to focus on something else as well after this, It's like when you watch a hard documentary, sometimes you need to watch like something very light and airy afterwards. Sometimes we might need to do that. Jesse?
It just seems like, in verse 18 here where it talks about in much wisdom, so much vexation, etc. I think as you get older and that wisdom increases, you have a responsibility to do something with it, right?
Yeah.
And so, you learn maybe these families have this problem, I've learned about it now, and now I have enough wisdom to know ways I can help.
Yeah.
So now you're obligated to become involved.
Yeah.
And then you become involved, and then these families might have problems, and then you're pulled kind of into their problems, and then you try and help them out with X, Y, Z things, and then maybe they resent you for some things. Who knows, what problems gets created, Or I feel like, in a way, maybe becoming an elder is this too, because you all of a sudden, as wisdom, become an elder, but now you're pulled into solving problems for people within the church. And then I think you realize, as an elder, I'm assuming how messy the church really is. That everyone else, I guess, they just play with their friends on Sunday, doesn't realize.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great small bit that represents the whole. That's just our community, right? But I think that's a great example because that's the truth of it. And it's right to come here and enjoy hanging out with our friends and being together and enjoying our family. What else will we do? We should do that. But for the people who have other knowledge or more wisdom, more understanding, it's more of a task to enjoy it. And I think we ought to, even elders or anybody in that position ought to put work into enjoying it. I'm sure they do. I know our elders do. But yet, it's still worth the pain, right? Because someone has to be involved with it. Someone needs to be involved on the front lines with the difficulties and the hardships. And this gets into the question, one of the things you said especially, there's how many problems get created from this. That's what verse 15 says, right? Look at verse 15. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what's the other thing that he says? The second line. Yeah, there's two ways to look at this. One is, this is a personal truth, right? That personally, I can't even tell you all the lacks I have, how many ways I'm not adequate to the job in front of me, and I can't even tell you how I can't even think about how to fix what's broken in me. But it's also true, maybe it could be true just totally, holistically, right? Where how many problems are there? Once you think there's this one problem in front of it, and you get to it, and you start to fix it, and then you look behind it, and it's just a line of problems right in line with it. It's a train, not just one. And then you try and look at how to fix that one problem, you can't even fix that problem. And I think the wisdom is you can say that's bleak, but sometimes I've actually found a lot of hope in this verse, because it's that's life. I'm not the only one that feels that way, right? That's one of the things, I don't know, I take a little bit of boost from verse 115. Because it's this is just true. It's not just me. I'm not just the only inept one in the world who feels this way. This is how life is a lot of times. But in general, in this section, how are our limitations expressed? That's one of them, right? Verse 15, I think, points at it, and similar to your point you're making, Jesse. But how are our limitations expressed in these verses?
It defines there's some things that we can't fix.
Yeah.
Don't even try it. What we can do is pray about it.
Sure.
And care about it,
Yeah.
If you don't, then, Daryl probably can, there's times when Hilda passed away, he's probably, oh, here he comes again. No, he wasn't. He was ready to say, hey, Greg,
Yeah.
cry with me or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And until we understand those problems, and there's, I don't have to go very far to find, in my realm, in my circle. But when we find it with God, that helps somebody else get through their trying to straighten out something that
Yeah.
can't be straightened.
Yeah. No, that's an important thing. That's an important observation to make, that he is saying, like, if again, in the secular worldview, if what's crooked cannot be straightened, what is lacking cannot be numbered, then what hope is there, right? But as we move on, and as you kind of get the point he's making, is that there has to be something else, right? The heart, we all desire another answer. We all desire that can't be it, right? All hope is lost. Is that it? Like, is that all that he's saying? And to your point, like with God and God's family, again, we take the sidestep into now, and we know that there are different answers. We know that with God, all things are possible, and all these verses and encouragements the Lord gives us. Good. How else does he express our limitations in this section? Do you guys?
He talks about wealth and wisdom, knowledge.
Sure. Wealth, wisdom, and knowledge. About our limitations and expresses them. Striving after the wind, right? Verse 17. I applied my heart to know wisdom and know madness. And in this context, we're supposed to look at this guy like Solomon, right? And maybe Solomon wrote this, whatever the case, we're supposed to imagine that we're listening to Solomon. And if Solomon is the one saying this, I, Solomon, the wisest man ever lived, applied my heart to know wisdom, madness, and folly. And what was my conclusion? Got it all figured out, right? Is that what he says? He says, no. It's like trying to catch the wind. Even though, in the sense, like, this is coming from the perspective of the wisest person ever lived. And he says, as much as you pursue wisdom, you're going to come up empty a lot of times. That's tough. That's a tough answer. But again, like, these are the limitations we have. And this is why, like, when I start to, like, step aside and apply it and look around, like, one of the things I struggle with is I have a nature of believing people, okay? And so when I start to listen to, like, people who are atheistic or agnostic or scientific, like all these different things, I'm like, oh, that sounds so right, And these people, all these people posture as if they know it so much. And the truth is, like, we all have the same limitations. I'm not saying they don't know those things, but it's just a good reminder and a healthy reminder for me to understand that these people that I kind of hold up, it's like don't meet your heroes, right? If you start to really interrogate that knowledge, if I could meet that person and really ask a lot of questions, I would find limitations crop up pretty quick, And this is everything, right? And it's just so important and so valuable that, Ecclesiastes is kind of, we're meeting our hero Solomon if we want wisdom, and his view on wisdom is, hey, sometimes you just come up empty. Maybe a lot of times. The more you pursue it, the more it's like striving after the wind. And in fact, in verse 18, the limitation for the more you search out wisdom, the more vexed you are. The more sorrowful you get. And in a sense, I believe there's almost like, there's only so much sorrow you can handle. And so sometimes you just got to say, okay, that's enough for today, right? I mean, to me, I know it's not what he's saying directly, but as I start to dwell on that, there's a conclusion here where it's like, oh, maybe some days it's just too much. And I can't increase any more in wisdom because I've already faced too much pain from this. I can't help these problems anymore because I've already tried, I've tired myself out, and I'm done, right? There's a lot in here that's there is a bleakness to it, but there is kind of a reality in how the physical world under the sun operates. Cass?
I think there's also a conclusion you can draw that's kind of literal. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot know all the wisdom in the world.
Yeah.
Your brain cannot handle it, and you don't have the experiences that everybody else has. There's no possible way that we can have perfect wisdom and perfect knowledge like God.
Yeah.
God in Christ only have that. part of our limitation as humans is that we only have one worldview.
Yes. Yeah. That last line especially, like all that is put. We can only have the worldview I have.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, like if you are born into privilege of whatever sense, then that's the worldview you have. And so we don't, or if you're born into absolute poverty in whatever senses that's true, that's the worldview you have. And those two people view a feasting table very differently, right? Or just view a home very differently, or a loaf of bread differently. And yet like, we can't fully empathize with all of that. But there is like, we just have our limitations, right? We can only really understand our perspective. Anything else about that? All right, we're not going to cover this last question. There's actually a couple more questions, 2 more questions for tonight, but we'll pick them up next week. So I'm writing questions I think will be about enough for one class, but if we go over, don't worry about it. We'll just pick them up next Wednesday night, and we have enough time to take as long as we need. But I do want to start maybe getting into 2:1 through 11. I want to read it, at least tonight. I'll read this section, and then we can start to think about this. What all is pursued to understand wisdom by the preacher? Ecclesiastes 2:1, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven a few days of their life. Great works, houses and vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens, parks, and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity, and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Oof, right? Well, so what all does he pursue here? And we'll pick up next week talking about this too, so don't feel worried about it. But like, what all does he pursue in these verses? Everything, right? But what is everything? What are specifics that he would pursue?
700 wives and 300 concubines.
Yeah, he said, I have all these slaves and concubines, right? Like, there's kind of the very hedonistic pleasures involved in this. What else did he pursue? Silver and gold. What did you say, Monty? Yeah, gardens and parks, like architecture, like landscape architecture, right? Just the beauty of all this. What else? Laughter. Wisdom, laughter, enjoyment, pleasure. So we see the conclusion he comes to, and we'll pick up here next week at the beginning of chapter 2, but you're starting to see, as he starts with these huge points, and in chapter 2 we're going to start getting into the specifics, how he specifically sought out the wisdom and the experience of all sorts of paths in life. And even though, like Jesse made this point, there's the vanity of vanities, which is the vanity of it all, but he searches out the particular vanities of each thing. And we'll see his conclusion is the same with all of them. So we'll pick up here next week. There's some questions. We'll also get into the next section of questions, so don't leave without grabbing one of these for next week. And I'll post these on Realm as well for you if you'd like. But these questions will be the guide for our discussion for class like tonight. I really appreciate all your comments and participation. I love you all. That's it for class tonight.